All right, cool. And here we are for Dualistic Unity Raw Sunday edition. I'm very excited about this. So we have 12-ish days until the Netherlands retreat starts. I'm very excited because we have quite a few people that are already coming, but a few people have reached out and they've mentioned that their financial situation makes it a little difficult for them to purchase the tickets with one payment upfront. And so they've asked if they can arrange a payment schedule or payment arrangements over time. We're happy to do that. Of course, it depends on the situation and what it is you're looking for, but we're happy to be reasonable. If we can help you get to this retreat, we would love to do so. So do reach out to us if you can. You can do so through the website. You can contact us on Discord, or you can reach out on social media. Though social media is a little bit harder to get in touch with us. Instagram for Dualistic Unity is probably the best account to message if you're going to message us via social media. But yeah, if you're having problems getting the entire ticket price together at once, no worries. We can definitely help work things out in terms of getting you to the retreat. So that's pretty much it. That's all I had to say for there. Aside from that, I'm looking forward to the longest goddamn flight I've ever been on. Because aside from booting around the States for the last year, which has been fun, don't get me wrong, or the last 6 months especially, because Dualistic Unity has had numerous mini retreats and we have more coming up. It's different though to take a 3 or 4 hour flight versus 10 or 12 hours. But I'm very excited about the fact that my daughter is going to be with me. She's going to be coming over to Europe. It's going to be an experience that we're both going to be having for the first time. So it's going to be an adventure. And I was just mentioning to everybody that is flying over there that we will be seeing you at I believe it's Schiphol Airport, the airport in Amsterdam. And the bus will be picking us up at 4 p.m. So we will give you our contact details, our cell phone numbers and whatnot. You can text us when you arrive at the airport and we'll let you know where we are all mustering. We will have an official DU muster point, and then we'll meet you at the bus where we will all get on our coach and go for a 2-hour drive across the Netherlands. I'm looking forward to the scenery. And then we're going to be at the lodge, which is going to be fucking incredible.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be a fucking blast, and just the journey there, and getting to another side of the world with a bunch of people who are willing to have this conversation and just be themselves and just explore and make that leap of faith to do it all together and get together in a situation like that. It's incredibly exciting. And yeah, I've been way more responsive on my Instagram, so that is another viable place. I check it pretty much every day now. It's something that I wouldn't check for so long, but yeah, the secondary third follow-ups, although for retreats I prioritize all of those, so I'm always on the lookout for questions about the retreat, thoughts about the retreat. So yeah, if you got them there, feel free to try a couple different spots and someone will get back to you at some point. But yeah, it's going to be just a incredible time. Like I've just no idea what to expect. And that's the beauty, is I'm not expecting anything. And that's something I've been realizing more recently with even just being involved in a situation. Like I've always had this idea that I have to, be prepared for something, like have an idea going in. But all that does is distract me. I'll get caught up in, a situation from time to time where, I almost sit back in my mind and think I have to consider what's going on, consider what's happening, consider how things are playing out, or strategize the next thought or move. And it's been hitting me more and more like I'm just missing what's happening as I continue to do that over and over and over. And so I haven't as much anymore. And I'm realizing, no, it's like you can just be where you're at. You can just be focused, attentive to the experience that you're having. And that's where the things come up. Like that's where the thoughts, insights, responses, conversations are happening. And as soon as there's the question of what should happen next, what should I do next, what's the best response to have, as opposed to just being there for it and responding and having that sort of seamless response and sort of like a integration into what's happening, it's right there, but it's such a different feeling of experience, and there's so many reasons that I told myself that I couldn't just be right there and, like, involved in the spot. Like, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if I do this? What if I say this? And more and more and more, like, I'm going through situations where that shit'll come up, but then, post situation, like, it's gone. Like, it's not there anymore. Like, things don't linger in the same way that they used to for me, but it's almost like it's the moment to moment situation is catching up to the post experience, because it doesn't stay with me so much, the thought of like, "Oh, how'd that go? How'd I do?" Like, we get off an episode or something, and, like, maybe during an episode, I'm going through stuff going on, but then, like, post episode, it's like, it's done. It's not like, "Oh, man, that went this way, that went that way." It's like I'm able to see, "Oh, I don't know how that went. I don't know, whatever." And even still, there will still be times where I feel like I could know, and you still can't, because I get caught off guard with an expectation of how I thought something went, and then it turns out that for someone else, it was entirely different, or something that I didn't think went a certain way. Someone will tell me, like, it went an entirely different way for them, and I'm, like, so caught off guard, because it can be so far from the way that I think something's going. Like, the reality of what's happening can be so far from my perspective of what's happening, and the more I go through that, the more I realize that, the less weight I have on my perspective of what's going on, and it's more of moment to moment considerations than holding on to ideas about it and having this sort of strategic approach to my life. And that's been wild, because for years it's been, curating and thinking about what's to come. Like, you posted recently that clip of having a 5-year plan or not having a 5-year plan, and being asked, like, "What's your 5-year plan?" It's like, well, in 5 years, I wanna be in a spot where I'm not wondering what my 5-year plan is, and not considering what my 5-year plan, and I feel like I used to do that for fun, like, think about what's gonna happen next, where this is gonna lead to, what's gonna go on, what's gonna happen, and it would be almost like Fantasyland considerations, but all it was distracting me from where I was at. And all of, whether it was fear or whether it was excitement, they both are equal distractions from what's going on. And then it only reinforces that behavior, where it's like you get to the spot that you're excited for, and, like, you're not even used to being there. So you have to almost, like, keep the experience a little bit at bay, and it's such a fucking bummer. Like, it's such a shame, as much as it is what it is. It's like, god damn. So it's beautiful, though, in the sense that leading up to things, you can just be where you're at. And the moments that things, seem a certain way, just coming back to, okay, but I'm here. Like, what can I do with this right now? And understanding, like, that's all you can ever do. And in moments, it seems like, oh, I can't do enough. But then pairing that with it's all you can do, and then continuing to be there to do that, there starts to be a sort of flow of things. But it's so simple and basic in certain spots, and so incredibly, like, seemingly, like, far and complex in other situations, but it's still that spot that you're in. And so, anyway, it's interesting, and that's the beauty of, something like the retreat, like the Netherlands. Like, someone considering the Netherlands retreat is like, you don't have to have any idea of what's gonna happen. I'm just talking to myself too. Like, I don't have to have, a set idea of ways to be or ways to act or curated things, because being myself is only a place that I can be right now. I can't consider how to be that. I can't look forward and be like, how am I gonna be myself in, like, next week, in this position, in this spot? All I can do is be it now, focus, like, be where I'm at now, do what I can now, not even in preparation, but just in focus and attention. And that kind of becomes the preparation, but not in a preparative way, just in a prioritization way that then carries over into more and more of everything that I continue to do.
Yeah, it's weird. It's kind of like a catch-22, right? Because so we're growing up and as we're gaining awareness, we're starting to realize that we can do more things for ourselves. And so we're still lost very much in what I should do, what I should be, all of that. But every time that we get excessively selfish, let's just say somebody comes over and goes, "You're hurting me." And so there is this trade between getting what you want and focusing on you and the aftermath that goes with that versus being sensitive and giving up some of the things that maybe you think that you want right now to make you feel better because you're suffering, right? But that's it, is that we get caught up in what do I need? What do I want? What's going to alleviate, the darkness for me? And we leave a swath of chaos behind us. And it's just because the alternative is to slow down and be more aware, more sensitive. And this is why I say we have no control because we don't know what the outcomes are. And the more we're focused on what we want, the less we're focused on what the consequences might be. Right. And so all we have is the trade between tunnel vision versus acceptance and surrender. Right. And so more and more you can pick a direction, but then it's feeling each step. And this is why I always lean on empathy. This is why I always lean on empathy, because the more empathetic you are, the more you realize that you are impacting yourself. And you could say yourself, but you could think of it as other people who feel just as much like you as you do. And that's it. They feel they're exactly like you. They feel exactly like you. And every impact that you have on yourself ripples through them because they are you. Right. And so out of empathy for yourself, you're a little bit not cautious, but more mindful of everything you do and why you do it. How much chaos you're leaving behind you in the need to get something. And it's just because it's creating chaos for yourself. It's creating chaos for yourself. And that might be conceptual at first, and it likely will be. And this is something I've noticed is difficult because we want to we are all awareness acting out. It really is all you, and we really are all one. But you see, all of those words mean nothing until you've stopped being fixated on your idea of yourself. Because as long as you have an idea of yourself that you are relying on, that when you think about yourself, you aren't just left with this space of uncertainty. Like as soon as you self reflect, what are you left with? And if you have ideas of who you are, that's why you're missing the reality of what's around you, is because you're still dwelling on that idea of what you are. What you are is not your idea of yourself. So when you self-reflect, you should be just looking at everything else. You should be looking at everything. There should be this quiet, calm space in terms of there's nothing there to look at, and yet there's everything there to look at. So looking at yourself isn't settling on an answer or settling on an idea or settling on a self even. It's like looking into a black hole and seeing all the potential. But it's the idea of you that gets in the way of that black hole. It's each and every idea of you that gets in the way of looking at what you are. And so until you've given up on all of those ideas, even having a fragment of truth, it's very difficult to understand that we're all you. Because it's the idea of you that gets in the way. It's the idea of me that goes along with that. Because as long as you have an idea of you, you have an idea of me. And when you let all of that go, then we are just what is. There is just what is.
Yeah, and those yeah, and all of the considerations that come with that balance, right? Of continuing and the application of it like is vital, right? It's like it's an entirely different experience in the sense and yet not at all. Like it's still just what it is. And you're always going to be doing something. It's just the focus is, and depending upon the focus, it's going to dictate those actions and the sensitivity to certain actions. And like the amount of things that we can miss by focusing even on some idea of what's going, like an uncomfortable feeling. And then it's like all of our priority can be on getting rid of the feeling as opposed to not coming up with a certainty about that or what it is, or that I have to do something about it, and continuing to be involved in the situation, to be focused on what's actually happening as opposed to looking for means of distracting myself from certain feelings. And like, I guess that's not overcoming certain feelings, but working through certain feelings is just not avoiding them, is just being willing to face them without the immediate gut reaction of, I want to get rid of this. How do I get rid of this the quickest? How do I alleviate this thing, instead of just sitting in it, continuing to consider everything, not having that focus on myself necessarily, or the certainty that what I'm going through is at all divided from anything else, almost keeps that focus in reality, in a sense. Because if you think that you're going through an experience that's only separate to what you think you are and tied to that idea, that's where all the considerations are going to go, as opposed to, oh, this experience is a component of reality. Like, this is very much interconnected to every other experience that's happening right now. That's going to change the considerations about how it's dealt with, how it's looked at, because it feels so fucking personal when you're going through something, but it's not. And that's wild to realize, because then it kind of alleviates, in a sense, it alleviates the weight of what would cause me to act selfishly versus not, when it's the focus on myself. And then one way or the other, depending on how I'm seeing that feeling or that situation, it's going to shift the actions that go with it, the considerations that go with it, because it's not this illusion that it's something's just happening to me. Like, nothing is ever just happening to you. Nothing is ever just happening to me. And so when there are things that come up, if there's the illusion that something could possibly, that there's even a slight little tiny chance that it could just be happening to me, then that's where the energy and the focus and the considerations are all going to go. It's like the immediacy of, I'm feeling uncomfortable and I don't want to feel uncomfortable. But it's not like, that doesn't solve the discomfort itself. It just temporarily gets rid of it until it comes back again, and it's still there. Like, you can't even avoid certain weights by avoiding them or not looking at them. Like, they're still going to be felt. They're still in there. And the only way, and so it's not even about getting rid of them. It's just about letting go of the idea that it's something that you have to get rid of. It's not something that you need to get rid of. And I know we were talking last week, and how my perspective of just being in the shit or lost in shit has shifted, and there's more, and it's been wild, because it's like, I'll forget sort of that spot and get lost in something or caught up in something. And then I'm like, oh, but if I don't mind being in the shit, if I can recognize that I'm learning something here, like things are being processed, things are being felt, it's not divided from any other experience, it's not just personal to me, then there isn't so much fight towards it. And it's like, that's so much of the experience is the fight of it, the thought that, it shouldn't be happening. It's not to say that it immediately makes everything better, but it at least allows you to see beyond like the immediacy of, I don't like this I don't like this feeling. I don't like this situation. It's like there's more of a willingness to be like, all right, this is the spot right here. I can still do things without needing to focus on this is the exact thing that I have to deal with right now. It's like it's understanding that it's being dealt with through not digging into fighting it or trying to get rid of it is actually dealing with it in a sense, quote unquote, dealing with it or looking at it or, working through it or whatever words you want to use. And it's not getting rid of it. It's just that's allowing it to process, and the focus on it is almost getting in the way of the existing processing that it's like you're just noticing and making an opinion about, making a judgment about that then kind of slows down that processing almost, as opposed to letting go of the assumption that it's something that shouldn't be happening and just continuing to be, involved in what you're doing and being willing to take in all of the potential considerations and look at those and continue taking actions in those spots. And then all of a sudden it's like, y- there's times I almost forget that I was even going through something because it just kind of naturally falls away. And it can be kind of quick too. Like the shift can go quickly as opposed to, I remember in the past, it's lasted like it lasted years at one point, like years and years and years. And to think that now it's something like the depth of it can be felt and then in and out of in like, you know, 30 minutes is weird, wild, interesting. I don't know. Strange, but yeah, it's like a big shift, but it's also not because the immediacy of the experience and the freedom that comes with it is kind of unmatched. It's not familiar. It's not a familiar experience, even the freedom. And so there's opinions that can come up even about that.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because as your mentality shifts, it's like you're letting go of the priorities that you used to hold on to, but it's difficult to do them because they were priorities for so long. And so this ties into a question that we have here. How do I stop attaching to my idea of me when everyone around me reinforces it? And this is a perfect example of what you're saying, because there's so much to this question beyond what it sounds like. Give me one second. So immediately, as you were saying, there's the difference between taking it personally and looking at it as yourself versus other people, versus recognizing that this is just your experience. This is just your experience solely. So if you remove other people, then you have an entirely different way of perceiving this. Because if it's not other people, then it's you. It's a reflection of you. And there's nothing that you can do about that. You can't stop it from happening because obviously there's something happening there that has some value. And so it's really about just changing your perspective of it. And what I mean is that it's very much like as we grow up, there's this mentality that we have that people hurt our feelings. And as we continue to grow up, we recognize that people don't hurt our feelings. We allow people to hurt our feelings. And it's because we hold on to things that make us fragile and vulnerable. We hold on to things that we think our value comes from, and so people can tear us down. And so we grow up. And so when people come over and and they try and tear us down after a certain point, we're like, right, that's just them dealing with their shit. Our mentality has changed. We have not tried to stop them from doing what they're doing. We've just recognized it's coming from something other than what they recognize it's coming from. It's not personal, like you said, it's them working through their stuff. And so the same thing is true here in terms of how do I stop attaching to my idea of me when everyone around me reinforces it? Who's reinforcing it? Their perspective does not equate to yours. Their perspective can exist and you can still see beyond it. But in order to do that, you need to stop looking at it as you versus them. You really have to take it down to just being you. What are you reinforcing by reacting to it? Are you holding on to that hurt by saying that they hurt you? That kind of thing. And it changes your perspective of things to a large degree. But that means that everything becomes, well, not personal, but very individual to you. And that's what everybody's going through at the end of the day. And this is why we always talk about responsibility. But responsibility doesn't have to be heavy. See, immediately upon that, you're like, oh, but you know, people. And it's like the only reason you're doing that is because of old priorities. It's because of an old mentality. You used to look at your attachments to people as the relationships, right? And so all of a sudden now, without the ability to attach to people because they're not people, now that there is no possibility of disconnection, you have to realize that a relationship is different now. It's not about attachment. It's not about preference. It's not about, I like that person's low vibration or anything of that. It's all you. It's all you, which means that a lot of your behavior is going to change. A lot of how you interact with people is going to change. A lot of your relationships with people are going to change because you're no longer looking at them as being individual to the rest of everyone else. I've said it to you before that either everyone's a friend or no one is to me. That's why I don't like the word friend. It implies that certain people, they're going to abide by certain expectations because they fit in this category of friends. Everybody is just doing the same thing you are, the best they can.
And oh man. And so, because like the depth of that in regards to even just looking at our society right now with like the prioritization of finding the one or finding someone or being in a relationship, like it's insane how hard that's pushed to like you got to find your person, your one. And like I don't even I don't even know how to fucking think about that anymore. And I know I don't have to think about it, but like it's so fucking different. Like it felt like with yeah, like the societal blueprint or whatever, as absurd as it is, it's like there's a simplicity, but in like a simpleton simplicity that doesn't actually do anything. It's just like something to do. Like I don't know, like sucking on your thumb as a baby. It's something to do that provides this illusion of getting something, having something, but it doesn't actually provide the outcome that you think that it does. And so if that's the case, then it's almost not even worth considering as a viable option at all from the sense of like any sort of guarantee. And so the thought of even being with someone, like how much that's assumed is, that's a big component. You find your person. Like I have lots of friends, family around my age kind of going through, and it's like, oh, getting close to 30. And I don't even think about that. Like, fucking, what does that even mean? That, oh, I got to do it for who? Like, whose life are you living right now? Like, who's to say that you should or shouldn't be doing anything? But it's funny because if I talk to someone about that and just like have very little concern for being close to 30 or being single or any of it. It's like it almost doesn't even cross my mind ever at all. The thought of, oh, what's gonna happen? It's like the, to even prioritize that above your moment to moment experience, like inevitably, like you're gonna trade something off for that if it's not a sort of like natural progression happening. It's not to say don't put yourself out there, but to do it out of need, like someone has got to be the one for me. It's like I don't I don't think about that in that way anymore. But then there's also because like thoughts processing whatever, it's always coming up, and like it's it's interesting because it seems like there's almost like I've been feeling more and more considerations about everything, and just hitting me more clearly that I'm not in silo going through anything. And so in a situation, you feel certain things, you even hear certain thoughts, like they're they're yours, but they're not personal in that way. They're being translated in that way. And so no matter what feeling situation you're going through, like there's no division between any of those situations. It's not even like a proximity thing necessarily. It's not like, oh, I'm hearing the thoughts of the person next to me. It's like there's potential for hearing all the thoughts, almost like the I'm not saying I've felt this necessarily, but in a sense, when you realize like it's one mind, like the considerations coming in, almost like in Bruce Almighty when he hears all the prayers at once, like that's almost something that I may be experiencing right now and just have enough in the way that it's not being looked at or considered. And so with that, there's no personal separate situation. Like there isn't a separate experience that I'm experiencing at all. And the thought of committing to someone for even an extended period of time, like I I am getting an understanding for, your thoughts going into relationships and thoughts about relationships because it can't be a guarantee for tomorrow. It can't be a guarantee for a year and certainly can't be a guarantee for the rest of my life. Like that's an insane fucking thing to do, to commit all, like it's in as much as it's like, but everyone's doing it. It's like it's wild. And I'm starting to just get a sense for that, like looking at it like that's absurd to commit that and in a guaranteed sense, and we see it falling apart. So there it's not even something that works. It's like that sort of blueprint, sucking on your thumb, whatever, something to do to feel like it's going to be the case. And oh, we're in a relationship, and so therefore all of these things and all of these ways to act and ways to be that takes away from that experience of prioritizing where you're at and the focus there. Because as those considerations arise more and more, focused on more and more things outside of where you're at or the experience that you're going through, it's going to diminish the experience that you're going through. And so, yeah, just my thoughts about that. There's almost, and I won't lie, there's still like a fear in there of even being in a relationship. Like there's almost an avoidance of it in me for sure. But like I can't even, the thought of being that closely tied to someone, like I don't know what that might just be my own shit coming up too. That might be just my own avoidance patterns in a sense, that because there's not a right way to do it. It's not even saying that it's wrong to be in an extended relationship. I'm not saying that at all, but you can certainly convince yourself that, you could go to the other extreme, and it's not about extremes. It's not about a guarantee. It's not a right or wrong. It's not like wrong to be in an extended relationship, and it's not right to not be in one, or it's not right to be in one or not to be in one. Like there's not guarantees like that. And I like how quickly I'll come up with saying, like, almost thinking there is a side that is more correct or more incorrect for anything. And it can't be that. It's just the sensitivity to where I'm at. But there's no certainty or control or guarantees of anything in that. But so anyway, my perspective on relationships, especially like romantic ones, has just, I don't even know what to think about them anymore. And I think that's probably a decent spot to be in, but it's certainly not certain or super comfortable, I guess.
Oh, it's just because everybody else is doing doing what everybody else is doing, and nobody is looking at why or the consequences of it. I mean, you could just be burning through relationships right now. You could be going from one to the next, each one failing just because you need to be in a relationship, and that puts a lot of pressure on it, and that makes you accept people, and give excuse me, red flags and miss just because you want to fill that slot. So it's just that everybody else is doing that, and so this kind of goes back to the conversation we were having in the episode, relationship with yourself. You're developing one now. You've stopped living relative to your perspective of others and how they perceive you, or at least you're letting that go. And so now you're finding your own space. But in finding your own space, you're going, wow, I've never really had my own space. And so you're way more hesitant to give it up. Whereas everybody's just fucking begging for someone to take that space because they're terrified to be alone. Right. They just don't want to be alone. They want to, make sure that they're living the right way, that somebody ensures that they feel validated and loved and all that other stuff. And so there's a lot of need behind our relationships. But that said, and this goes towards a question that we have: how do I know how to make friends? Who to make? How do I know who to make friends with if I never know who anyone is? I don't want to attract selfish assholes in my life. Relationships are meant to be organic. People drift in and out of your life all the time, and some of them linger and some of them don't. But the ones who linger are lingering based not just on who they are, but who you are showing them, which is who you are. And so if somebody is selfish and they continue to put themselves first and you're just tolerating it because you don't want to be alone, right? Then that relationship's going to maintain. Whereas if you're honest with yourself and and you say, I don't really like that, I don't appreciate that, and you end up distancing yourself as a result, or that person changes. The point is that the relationship is organic. It's not a result of holding on to someone because you don't want to be alone. And so there's a big part of patience that goes with that. And it's just because you don't know who anyone is, which means that you can know somebody for years and then all of a sudden find out they're not the person that you thought they were. And there's plenty of examples of that in our life across the spectrum, right? We always assume that we know people. Well, why do we assume that? Well, because it makes us more comfortable, right? But what we really need to know is ourselves, because who we are, who we're willing to accept that we are, who we're willing to embody, dictates the relationships that we maintain. It dictates the type of people that are going to hang out with us. Like, I don't have any selfish people in my life because frankly, they find me really frustrating. And it's just because I don't value the same things that they do. Now, I don't go out of my way to keep an eye out for selfish people. I just recognize my own selfish tendencies, and I look at those and go, okay, I don't really need to do that. And because I don't prioritize them, people who do prioritize them tend to drift away. And again, they'll make it personal. They'll be like, "Oh, well, he's always got to think about deep stuff." It's like, no, you just don't like thinking about deep stuff. It's like it's not about me at all, really, right? And so that's kind of the point, is to just understand that relationships form over time. They're not meant to be, you meet all of my perceived needs, therefore you're a friend now, right? It's like, haha, you've qualified. Welcome to friendship. And that's not what it's meant to be. A friendship develops over time, respect develops over time, trust develops over time. But we want so badly to say, like, this person's trustworthy. Well, how do you know that? Well, they seem really nice. It's like, how about you go through the crucible a few times with that person? How about you go through the fire and see where they are, right? How about you see how they are when they go through the fire and how they treat you? Give it time. Experience is really the only thing that we have that allows us to demonstrate who we are. But we're not looking for people to demonstrate who they are. We're asking them to be who we want them to be. That changes things a lot. But that means, again, patience. It means being willing to let people come in and out of your life without taking it personally. Understanding that, I guess, especially in a world where there is so little in terms of being authentic, in terms of just being yourself, that the more yourself you are, the harder it will be for people in this current society to resonate with you. The people who are being themselves are going to, but they're far and few in between, or at least they have been. Things are changing, though. You can see it. You can see it happening, but it's just that we don't know what to do with this increased awareness, this increased sensitivity. I'll give you an example. You were talking about this earlier in terms of like you can just sit and consider all of the quote unquote prayers in the world, which is really just a way of saying you could sit and realize how much suffering is happening for everyone, how much everybody is going through hell. You can listen to all of the things that you would cry out for in terms of crying out for help, and they're all within you, and recognize that all of us feel the same way. You can sit in that, and that would govern your actions, right? To a very large degree, but it would also cripple you to some degree to recognize that no matter what you do, somebody's going to take it personally. No matter what you do, someone's going to feel hurt, because it's not about what you do. It's about the fact that they have the right to make themselves feel hurt, or they may not even know that that's how that works. Right. And so it's like I was saying before on a psychedelic trip where I was sitting on the concrete across the lawn from my home, and I was really empathizing for the grass. I had been sitting there feeling the grass as the sun was coming up, and you could see it. And so all of a sudden, it was getting hot and warm, and it dawned on me that at night when it was cooling off and there was more moisture, it was like the grass was breathing. And it dawned on me day to night that the grass was breathing in and out, and I was empathizing with it, and I didn't want to walk on the grass. I felt so much empathy for the grass. And it's just because I tuned in to how many considerations exist for this single organism. And you can tune into how many considerations exist for all of life, for all things that exist, for humanity or animals or plants. And you can get so lost in that sensitivity that it cripples you. And this is what happens often with veganism. All of a sudden they become incredibly aware of how much hurt is happening on one side of our society, and they focus on that as the evil, right, as opposed to all the hurt that's happening all the time, including the people who work in that unfortunate industry, you know all the suffering that our society as a whole has been culminating. So they're all in there if you're willing to just sit in it and empathize with yourself. This is something that a few people in the community have been going through recently. Is just the recognition that however comfortable they've been in their life, they still suffered through self-judgment. They still suffered through doubt. They still suffered through fear, the feeling that they couldn't be enough, that they had to compare themselves. They had to keep up. If they lost any of what they had, they'd have no value. Like, people suffer. We all suffer to some degree, or rather we all have the capacity to make ourselves suffer. We have the capacity to get lost in suffering. And with that, you can empathize a lot. But likewise, you have to recognize that free will, man, I can do it to myself and everybody else can too. So it's really just being as empathetic as you can and continuing on as you must, because you have a part to play. Right? You have your life to live. You got to step on the grass sometimes, right? Like eventually you got to go to the store and you got to deal with the person who doesn't want to be at fucking work behind the counter. And you're like, hey, how's it going? And they're like, just take your fucking coffee and go. And you're like, what the fuck is that person's problem? And there's no empathy in that moment. But if you think about it later, you're like, they were probably having a shitty day. Right. And it's difficult, as we were saying at the beginning, the trade-off between moving forward and maintaining sensitivity. But it's a balance, and it's something that develops over time as you continue to move forward. As you continue to let go, as you continue to surrender your illusions, you become more and more aware. But you also become aware that there's no point in judging yourself. There's no point in judging yourself. You're always going to cause some degree of harm. You may not mean to, but you don't have control, which means the best thing you can do is be sensitive. And the only way to do that is to not be self-absorbed, which means you can't judge yourself.
Yeah, fucking A. How much that self-judgment, like, it's oh my god, and it's pushed as, like, a victim mentality sort of thing, and I've done so much of that goddamn shit throughout my life, and I don't judge myself for doing it. I know everyone goes through it and does it, but, like, how much it is that avoidance of, all of the considerations and the amount of considerations that come in, like, that you start to feel, and it's like it's always that balance of being willing to see all of the considerations and like take them in, but still understand that you can only do one thing at a time. But there's a sensitivity that then drives that one thing at a time based on the considerations without the overwhelming without it getting too overwhelmed, but you have to have faith in yourself. And if it's like, if there's this back and forth between all of the considerations, like you were saying, you can get lost in looking at them. You can get lost in considering the considerations, and then that can be how you're spending your time, but that's not that's not finding the balance. And as much as it's not, it is. Like, that's a component of finding the balance as well, like seeing all of them, but you can't find the balance by not doing things. Like, you find the balance of how to see all of the considerations and be sensitive and not get overwhelmed and continue to make just decisions and do things and continue to do things, because even the thought of making a decision is like makes it seem like it's separate from the thing that you're doing. Like, I'm going to decide to do this and then do this, as opposed to just continuing to do things, continuing to take in all the considerations and then find that balance through taking in all of the considerations and then just picking something and doing it and allowing all of your attention to be involved in that. Then you learn something. But it's wild, like, as the shifts happen, like, how many more considerations come into play that were always there, that have the potential to be, I don't know, overwhelming if you look at them all at once. But then it's finding that balance, and the thought of, like, oh god, like the walking on the grass thing, the amount of times that I've second guessed myself, or like double checked something, or thought about something 3, 4, 5 times, done something over and over and over, that just like stagnates me. It just keeps me in the same spot, because there's the concern of, yeah, it's like a deep concern of, if you step on the grass might not like you. But you have to be willing to go through things and let the chips fall as they may. Like, maybe that person's not going to like you for acting that way. And that's fucking all right. Like, how are you going to live your life? And that's so much of where things come from for me, is like not wanting to be disliked, I guess. And I'm getting more and more willing to not prioritize that, understanding that there's no means of control in that. And like, someone having no opinion of you is almost worse than them having an opinion of you. And that was like my goal for most of my life, was just like do my best to avoid someone having an opinion of me. And that was, shift in starting to put myself out there more and more, and letting go of the concern of someone thinking a certain way. Oh, someone doesn't like me here, someone likes me here. Because as you were saying, like, it's just reflective of where they're at, what they're going through, their own sorts of things. So, like, at the end of the day, it doesn't have to do with you when they like you or dislike you. It's based on their own preference. And as you were saying, the more willing you are to be yourself, the less you're going to fit into some box, some standardized, curated, comfortable, easy to understand box. And like, just in my experience, I remember even like years ago, someone saying like, I can't really figure Andrew out. Can't really figure out what he's all about. And like, I heard that and I was like, it's kind of a good thing, right? And this was like 5 or 6 years ago. And like, for someone to think they have you figured out is just them holding on to a massive illusion. Like, you can never actually figure someone out or take in all sides of them or all considerations. You can just do your best to be sensitive to, when you are with them, what you do see, and base things off of there, but not from a preferential side. It's more just a sensitivity side, and being willing to see yourself in them, like, to be willing to realize, oh yeah, I could, like, not avoid the reality that you could act the same way, do the same things, take in the same sort of considerations, be the same degree of whatever they're being. Because then there's not the avoidance of yourself in that, because that's all you're doing. That's all I'm doing when I'm, thinking that someone else should be different or that I even know them, that even my idea of them is remotely close to what they are, to who they are. And it's never the case. So even if there is the thought of them, not liking you or liking you, like things are going to be what they're going to be. And I don't even find myself necessarily settling upon ideas of, oh, I like this person. Oh, I don't like that person. Like it's very much coming closer to, oh, I'm interacting with this person right now. And this is what I got. Like the thought of me liking or disliking them is entirely irrelevant to the situation at hand. Like I can make the most of it because I'm making the most of my life. So it's not as relevant who I'm interacting with or what I'm interacting with. And so, but then like I can see that in myself, but then I can still fear, perceptions of someone else seeing me in a certain way. But again, like I was saying before, like then post experience, there's not even a second thought. It's like I'm where I'm at then, but then in the moment there can still be the buildup of concern or thoughts. And I know that stuff runs deep for a lot of people. And so to think that, oh, I should even, the thoughts of I should be over something by now is a crock of shit. Like to think that you're going through something that's separate to you, that's focused on you. So even the thought I should be over this by now, like who? Like reality should be over this by now? There's a lot of things happening in reality, a lot of considerations at play, a lot of actions being had. So the thought that I should be over something right now is discounting what you are, is discounting the reality of what you are. And so you going through something is not a separate experience. And yet it's just you going through, it obviously it depends on the perspective that you're taking, but there's not a division in the experience. And so you're never just you as the thing that you think you are never just going through something separately. The reality of you is going through things and you're a lot. Like you're a lot of considerations, a lot of perspectives. And so, it's almost like the more willing you are to let go of your own, the more come into play, the more you see and feel. And there's always the opportunity to take it personally, but it never means that it is. It never means that it's just separate from everything else only happening to you that you have to handle, deal with. Like it's already in process. And you can continue to just be attentive and sensitive to where you're going. And it doesn't have to be a priority of, oh, I'm feeling this way, I want to feel differently. It's like, this is the experience that's being had, and things can be done from this spot no differently than they can be done from any other spot. Because I have myself here now. And so the feelings and ideas of the experience become less and less relevant, which allows me to stay where I'm at and do things where I'm at, as opposed to being lost in the idea of what's happening, and therefore the idea of what I think should be happening.
I think it's also important to remember that we discount what we're getting over. We tend to think that we're getting over individual things, but you're trying to get over fear itself. You're trying to get over the capacity to focus on identity itself. That's all it is. Like we're not focusing on all these getting over all these little things. You're not trying to focus on getting over the need for a relationship. You're getting over the fear that you're not going to be in one, and the fear that you're alone, and the fear that you're divided. You're dealing with fear. That's why it becomes a need. Right? It's more or less it. And when you break it down that way, you're like, I'm dealing with fear. I can't ever get rid of fear because I'll always have the capacity to fear. I can't get over identity because I'll always have the capacity to take it as truth. See, it's not about getting over it. It's about becoming aware of it. It's about looking at it and going, right, I can be afraid and still do things. Right? Because that's the thing about fear is it convinces you you're stuck. Oh my God, I don't know what to do. Something. Something. And as soon as you do start doing something, the fear starts to dissipate a bit. Because at least now you're doing what you can, as opposed to just being locked in place like a deer in the headlights. Right? And so it's fear and identity as a whole. And you're never going to get over that. But you can become aware of how they work. You can become aware of how they influence you. And you can become aware of what your choices are when you're going through them. But to do that, you have to be responsible, which means you have to be solely in your experience. It's the thing about blaming other people for our fears that it's their fault. It's not ours. What can we do about it? Where if it's just my fear, then I'm the only one who can do something about it.
Yeah, and so that concern, that fear of anyone else is almost passing off it is passing off the responsibility of the fear and, like, realizing that it's only coming from me, and so considering and focusing on other people's perceptions ever is just an avoidance of the reality that the fear is there. Like, it's not coming from an external source, it's a component of a potential, a potential way of looking at things, a potential way of looking at yourself, and the more you see yourself as something separate, the more I see myself as something separate, the more fear almost makes sense, and the less you see yourself as something separate or your experience being separate or divided or the experience you're having being siloed to you or separate to you, there's less it's almost like there's less of a not intensity, like the intensity of fear can still be there, but there's less of a focus on getting rid of the experience and more understanding the experience or, looking at the experience or almost getting a feel for the experience and like an understanding of the experience. But it certainly isn't about immediately getting rid of it because it's not just a separate experience ever. And even the thought, like you said, like you can't get over fear or identity. Like the potential for it's always going to be there. There's not a spot. And I think fucking A, like even until I don't know, maybe today, I think I've been holding on to this idea that identity is something that can be, you know, overcome or surpassed or gotten rid of. And immediately there's this like resistance towards anything that builds up that idea or identity or focuses on the idea or identity. And when that's not the all and everything of the, focus and consideration, the fear starts to, I don't know, be looked at differently, as something that can be understood. And there's almost an appreciation for my feeling of a separate experience because there's the empathy and understanding that comes from that because while having that perceived divided experience, the reality is that it's not. And so I can go through things that feel entirely personal, entirely like, it's only happening to me. I'm the only one going through something. But the reality is that I'm not. And the more honed in on focusing on myself I am, the harder it's going to be to recognize that this isn't something happening separate from anything else. It's not happening separately from any experience, but at the same time, the fear is going to be there. The ability to identify myself as something separate is going to be there, and it's always right there. It's like a pond. You can always dip your toe in, and there's certain experiences that make you wanna jump all the way in, and then there's certain experiences that make you wanna jump all the way out and fucking end it all, and it's still buying into the same limited idea that it's actually truth as opposed to just a just a potential and a way, the only way to experience is via that. And fuck, like I've definitely gained an appreciation for uh like I think a year or even 2 years ago, I was like, it's so obvious, it's so obvious. How the fuck does no one understand? Like you can realize, oh, nothing's disconnected. That means nothing's separate from you. That means that you're not this separate thing. But there's so much. Like I totally discounted how much there is behind that, you know, desire to be like, not even desire to see myself as separate, but in a sense, that and how much is behind that illusion that I am at all separate, but just like how much of our actions reinforce that. It's not just, the cerebral conversation. It's not just the insights. It's not just that at all. It's like everything we're doing collectively, individually, is reinforcing that perception, the way we live, the way we react, the way that we do things has the potential to either reinforce that illusion or help you to question it or realize that maybe it isn't so separate, but it's just from you being here, willing to take into considerations and be here, not focused on where something's going or what you're turning into or what something's becoming. But I definitely discounted the the depth of this. And yeah, it's still right there, and it's like, oh my god, it's like something I've wanted to forget. I don't even know.
As always, keep it light. See, expanding awareness is kind of a double-edged sword, because as much as you become more aware of all the beautiful things, you become more aware of their opposites. As much as you become more aware of freedom, you also become more aware of the prison. And so the reason I say keep it light is because you have an intuitive governor inside of you, in terms of you'll start to feel like, oh, that's a lot. Oh my God. And then you'll want to back off because there's just so much. And at that point, do feel free to just back off and go, "Whew, that's a lot. I'll deal with that later." Because you've already taken in more. See, you can't unsee anything. Even the moment you just had, you can't unsee that. You've already went a little deeper, saw a bit more, and it has changed you. Now it's coming up for air, because the alternative is feeling like you need to deep dive all the time until you drown in it, right? But if you don't build your tolerance, if you don't come up for air once in a while, not only does the diving suck, but you forget why it was enjoyable to begin with, why you did it to begin with. You're doing it to gain strength, you're doing it to gain depth, you're doing it to change as a person, right? So there's no point in staying down there the whole time, because then that's just going in one direction that you think is the best for you, and it will overwhelm you. Awareness will overwhelm you, because there's a point where you're going to go, I can't take that, and that's when it overwhelms you. And so the whole trick is to relax, to let that go, including the idea you can't take that because that's your tension, that's your fear, right? But a lot of that is based on new emotions, not even new emotions, but rather really old ones that we buried under false certainty, that we buried under ideas of ourselves and the world, that we buried in the details, right? The devil's in the details. We lost the forest for the trees, as it were. We started focusing on all the individual trees instead of the reason those trees affect us the way they do, right? Which is the entire forest. So it's important to just remember that you're always going to come up with more realizations of how you could do things differently. You're always going to have more insights about how you affect everything. You're always going to feel more empathy for everybody that you've ever impacted, because you're becoming more aware. always. The trick is to recognize that there is no alternative. I mean, aside from, stagnating and staying in one mentality, there is no alternative than for you to stumble along, hurt people along the way, and then recognize that you did. There's no alternative. This is how we learn. The trick is not judging yourself for it. The trick is not beat yourself up for not understanding this sooner. Because frankly, that's a collective responsibility. This is a responsibility of us as the whole. This is why it's so important how we raise our kids. It's so important what we do generation to generation, right? Because admittedly, all of this sensitivity for nature, reality, life as a whole was practiced a long time ago by a lot of different cultures. The whole 7 generation thing, consideration for any decision that you make, was coming from a state of pretty extreme sensitivity, right? So there were children who grew up being educated with this early on, being told about their sensitivity, not being given so many illusions of control, so many illusions of comparison. And their lives were very different. We are in a different societal cycle at the moment. And so it's even more important, in fact, that you continue to just keep it light as you change, because you're going to change everything else. It's just that we're catching this shit so late in life. But the fact that we're catching it all is amazing. The fact that we're able to question it at all is amazing, because again, it wasn't that long ago that people were burned at the stake. It wasn't that long ago there was some extreme resistance to self-awareness, to uncertainty as a whole. So take it easy, take it slow. Remember, it's always going to feel like I should have known this before, but you couldn't have. You couldn't have. The fact that you're aware of what you could have known before now inspires me. That's what makes me feel better, that you've already changed. Don't beat yourself up for it. Rejoice. You are changing.
Yeah, and it gets harder and harder to maintain a specific idea as you continue to change. Man, it's almost like there's so long we spend sort of just reinforcing to ourselves what we think we are and continuing to do things based on that. And then you come to a point where you're not doing that as often. Like, you're willing to jump into more things that maybe previously you would have been able to come up with some means of avoiding, you would have been able to come up with some excuse, like, in such a, oh man, it's like such a easy, basic sort of means of avoiding a certain thing. And it gets harder and harder to avoid those things, but that's the process of change. Like you mentioned, stagnation, like being able to avoid certain things that may change you becomes almost like an art form that you can get really good at if you're trying to avoid being change. And there's plenty of ways that we're able to do that, and plenty of ways to reinforce, and even just becoming an expert in something. Like, that's a mechanism that's pushed, but then it has the opportunity, like with everything else, to cause someone to stagnate. And so as I've been doing different things, and as people start doing different things with their lives and jumping into new things, it's like that idea begins to dissipate. And it is like you are entirely uncertain. Like, you're entirely uncertain about everything, about yourself, about what's going on outside of where you're at. And there's almost more of a blowback, or seemingly more of a blowback, to trying to continue to avoid change, in a sense, because it's like there's that awareness of what it is. There's the awareness of it happening and playing out. And so it's been interesting just going through. It's harder and harder for me to maintain a sort of idea, and yet there's still this almost pulling desire to, despite feeling repercussions of it. And I guess that's the finding the balance, the back and forth, because at first with all of this, or realizations or deeper recognitions, it was all more freeing, and it was kind of like this trajectory towards that. And that's, yeah, I mean, that's just the responsibility component coming into play, and the preference, and the idea of there being a guarantee of anything, and understanding that there can't be. So it's like when you try and act in a way that is going to guarantee that, it's like, I know deep down that that's not the case. Like, it doesn't guarantee anything. But yeah, like, yeah, when you said you can't, and you've said this a number of times, like, you can't unsee anything. Like, you can't unsee reality, and certain recognitions. And you can try. you can you can try to convince yourself that it's not the case, but you're only lying to yourself. You're only avoiding yourself when you do any of those things. And like that experience where there isn't so many thoughts, so many considerations, like, as there's the avoidance of certain recognitions, or the desired avoidance, it's like that comes with a certain experience. To an extent, that comes with a comparative, judgmental, concerned, kind of fear-based experience, that where fear is at the forefront of everything, as opposed to just continuing to be willing to be uncertain, and therefore, you know, free. Like, uncertainty and freedom going hand in hand. I never really recognized the depth of that, or the depth of uncertainty. And like, it's freeing, but it's fucking uncertain. Like, there's not
There is good news though,
control.
and I just want to
Yeah.
close with this rather. Nothing's changed. Like, understand, reality doesn't require any more of you now than it has the entire time. Just be yourself. That's all you can do. The only thing you've done is recognize how much more you are. The only thing you've done is just recognize more. You don't have to be harder on yourself because of that. Nothing's changed. The requirements of existence are be it. Just be existence. You don't have to be judging your progress. Just because you are becoming more aware doesn't mean anything else has changed. It's still just about you moving forward. You are enough. You're enough right now. It's not like, oh my God, I'm aware of all these things, therefore I need to step it up. You are stepping it up. That's why you're suddenly aware of these things. That's the whole point. The progress that you're looking for is not the progress that you're expecting, or is not the progress that you're going to make. It's the same as everything else. It's never the concept, right? The fact of recognition, the moment of recognition is the work. The judgment you do after that is the shit that's getting in the way.
Yeah, that's obviously important to keep in mind. Like, you can go all over the place with thoughts and conceptual ideas of what's going on. It doesn't change the fact that you're here now. Like, this is still it. Like, this is all you can do with anything ever. And as you keep doing shit here, like actually here, as opposed to with all of these other potential hypothetical considerations, it's like there's enough considerations right here. You don't have to add on all of these other thoughts about future or past base considerations, and that'll then inform where you're at. Like, it doesn't change anything at all. If anything, it just kind of has the potential to be relaxing, in the sense that this is what you got. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of considerations that you could look at, but they're there, and they're in process regardless of whether you're focusing on them or not. And you still got what you got right here. And that then informs your entire experience. So anyway, I know we're at time, but
Just
yeah.
keep dancing on it. That's all it is. Just keep dancing on it. This is really the trick of all of this, everyone. It's not anything else. It doesn't mean that you're not taking it in just because you are not letting it drag you down. Right? There's nothing that you can do except continue to grow and learn. And as you do, there's going to feel like there's more and more weight through all the things that you're suddenly aware of, but your part has not changed. Your part is changing on its own just through increased awareness and sensitivity. Have faith in that. You can dance. You're going to be just fine. You can keep things light, and everybody else will benefit from that. But if you add weight to yourself, if all of a sudden you're putting pressure to act in a certain way, we all suffer. You suffer, and we all suffer as a result. So just keep it light. Laugh at yourself. Play some music. Just remember, like, you've got eternity to be everything. There is no trajectory in that. There's nothing you need to do except settle in, try and enjoy it. Thanks for joining us, everyone. This has been a riot. We are going to continue on in Patreon in 14 minutes. Join us if you can. It's a tier 2 call. It's Sunday, of course. So we have a tier 3 call right after that. 3 hours of groups today. Woohoo! We would love to see you there if you can make it.
Bye, everyone.